A millionaire brought a homeless woman to his wife's birthday party, making her extremely angry. Days later, the wife completely collapsed when she discovered that the clock on the bedside table ticked softly, its luminous hands marking just past midnight. Christian lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the faint sound of Lauren's breathing beside him, an unsettling rhythm in the heavy stillness of the room. Lauren's distant gaze, her succinct responses, and the subtle change in how she occupied space next to him had all caused his mind to be restless for weeks. Yet, tonight, the tension had crystallized into something far sharper, like glass shattering within him. The vibration of her phone, faint but persistent, cut through the silence. Lauren stirred, but did not wake, her hand unconsciously brushing the device away. Christian glanced at her sleeping form, the soft rise and fall of her chest, so ordinary, so deceptively peaceful. His eyes fell to the screen, where the glow revealed a name that turned his stomach: Harold. The thought jolted him upright. For a moment, he did nothing, the weight of suspicion pinning him to the mattress. But the phone vibrated again, and with a trembling hand, he reached for it. The screen demanded a passcode. His fingers hesitated. He entered their wedding anniversary, once their shared code for everything. Incorrect. His chest tightened, a dull ache spreading like poison through his ribs. He tried again, this time using Lauren's birthday. Incorrect. Christian's hands trembled as realization began to claw at him. Lauren had changed the code, and she hadn't told him. He clenched his jaw, forcing himself to stay composed, though the betrayal was already creeping in, wrapping its icy fingers around his throat. The room felt suffocating. Christian set the phone down for a moment and looked at Lauren, her face bathed in the faint light from the screen. Her serene expression now seemed foreign, as if he were staring at a stranger. Steeling himself, he picked up the phone again. His final attempt. Her father's birthday. Unlocked. The screen bloomed with a barrage of messages. His eyes darted over the thread, every word slicing deeper into his chest. Harold's name was there, over and over, in texts laced with laughter and intimacy. Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Did he suspect anything? I've moved the funds. We're all set. His mind reeled. Funds. He scrolled further, his breath catching as he unearthed attachments, bank transfers, emails detailing transactions under shell accounts, his company's name woven through the threads like a venomous thread in an already deadly web. Christian felt his pulse roaring in his ears, the betrayal bleeding into every corner of his mind. Harold wasn't just his closest friend. He was the co-founder of everything Christian had worked so hard to build. And Lauren, she wasn't just unfaithful. She was complicit in dismantling the life they had constructed together. The phone slipped from his hand onto the bed with a muted thud. Christian sat frozen, staring at the wall as if it could offer some kind of answer, some justification for the unraveling nightmare before him. A bitter laugh escaped his lips, though it came out choked, strangled by the lump rising in his throat. His hand moved to his face, pressing against the stubble of his jaw as his shoulders heaved in silent breaths. His mind flickered back to moments from the past year, Lauren's sudden interest in finance, her insistence on helping manage their joint accounts, Harold's increased presence, always under the guise of camaraderie. Every piece now fit into a horrifying picture, one that Christian hadn't been able or willing to see. He stood abruptly, the bed creaking beneath the sudden movement. Lauren shifted slightly, but did not wake. Christian stared down at her, his hands balling into fists at his sides. Confronting her now would mean nothing. She would deny it. She would twist the truth and find some way to manipulate him, and he was too raw to face her lies just yet. Instead, he reached for his jacket, throwing it over his shoulders with a sharp motion. The air in the room had become toxic, each breath more suffocating than the last. Quietly, he stepped out into the hallway, each creak of the wooden floorboards beneath his feet amplifying his turmoil. The night outside was crisp, the cool air biting against his skin as he stepped onto the porch. He didn't know where he was going, but he knew he couldn't stay. His hands trembled as he pulled out his car keys, the faint click of the fob unlocking the vehicle in the driveway. Christian gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles whitening as he stared at the darkness ahead. Memories of laughter, of whispered promises, and fleeting touches played cruelly in his mind, each one tainted now by Lauren's deceit. He didn't cry. The tears seemed locked somewhere deep inside, buried beneath the icy veneer of his rage and disbelief. The betrayal wasn't just an affair. It was calculated, cold, and deliberate. It was a dismantling of trust, a deliberate erasure of the life they had built together. Christian didn't know how to move forward, but as the engine hummed to life and the road stretched out before him, he resolved one thing: Lauren and Harold would face the truth, no matter the cost. The car rolled slowly down the driveway, its headlights cutting through the shadows of the night. Somewhere deep in the pit of his stomach, amidst the swirling storm of emotions, a small ember of resolve began to burn. The city was cloaked in a restless quiet, the kind that belonged to the deep hours of the night when most people sought solace in sleep. The streets were empty, save for the occasional car passing, its headlights briefly illuminating the outlines of forgotten buildings and shadowy corners. Christian gripped the steering wheel tighter, his jaw set as he navigated the labyrinth of roads with no destination in mind. The betrayal played on an endless loop in his mind: Lauren's distant smile, Harold's overly familiar camaraderie, the sharp clarity of those messages. His chest tightened as he remembered the chilling words and the ease with which they had planned to dismantle his life. Harold's arrogance echoed in his memory, every smirk, now a weapon, Christian had ignored. The betrayal wasn't sudden. It was a slowly unraveling thread he'd failed to notice until it was too late. He glanced at the empty passenger seat beside him, the silence in the car pressing in on him. He wanted to scream, to fill the void with something tangible, but he only exhaled sharply, his fingers drumming restlessly against the steering wheel. A flash of movement ahead pulled him back to the present. Someone darted across the road, silhouetted briefly in his headlights. Christian slammed the brakes, his heart pounding as the car skidded slightly before coming to a halt. The figure froze in the glare, hands raised in defense against the sudden light. For a moment, neither of them moved. Christian threw the car into the park and stepped out, his breath visible in the crisp night air. "Are you okay?" he called, his voice rougher than he intended. The woman stepped out of the glow, her figure thin and hunched against the cold. She clutched a worn suitcase to her chest like a lifeline. Her clothes were mismatched and wrinkled, her dark hair pulled back loosely, strands falling into her face. She looked up at him, her expression wary but steady, her eyes dark and guarded. "I'm fine," she said after a pause, her voice low but steady. "I didn't see you coming. Sorry." Christian scanned her quickly, his instincts sharpening. Her face was pale, her lips slightly chapped, but it was her eyes that held him. They were tired, no, exhausted, but there was something behind them, a quiet strength that refused to be snuffed out. "Are you sure?" he asked, softer this time. "It's late, and it doesn't seem safe for you to be out here alone." She let out a short, humorless laugh and adjusted her grip on the suitcase. Safe isn't exactly a luxury these days. Christian hesitated, his gaze drifting to the suitcase. "Do you need a ride somewhere?" Her body stiffened at the question, and she took a small step back. "I'm not looking for charity." "It's not charity," Christian said quickly. my car came dangerously close to hitting you. It's responsibility. Her eyes narrowed slightly, but then she sighed and looked away, the tension in her shoulders loosening just a fraction. I don't have anywhere to go, she admitted, almost reluctantly. Not tonight, anyway. Christian gestured toward his car. Then let me take you somewhere warm. A meal, maybe. You look like you could use one. She studied him for a moment, her eyes searching his face for a sign of malice or pity. Finding none, she nodded slowly. Okay, just for tonight. They climbed into the car, the suitcase placed carefully at her feet. Christian glanced at her as he started the engine, noting the way she held her hands tightly in her lap, her fingers twitching slightly. The faint glow of the dashboard cast her features in soft light, highlighting the fatigue etched into her face. "What's your name?" he asked as they pulled onto the road. "Grace," she said quietly, staring out the window. After a beat, she turned to him. "And you?" "Christian," she nodded, her gaze drifting back to the passing buildings. "Thanks, Christian." The car filled with silence again, but it was different this time, not empty, but waiting. Christian glanced at her suitcase. "Looks like you've had a rough time." Grace's fingers tightened around her coat. "I lost my dad last month," she said, her voice flat but tinged with rawness. "He was sick for a long time, and I had to quit my job to take care of him. Advertising. That's what I used to do." She let out a shaky breath. "Now he's gone, and I'm figuring things out." Christian didn't respond immediately, his mind turning over her words. She wasn't asking for sympathy, he realized. Her tone was resigned, her story a matter of fact. "I'm sorry," he said finally, his voice low but sincere. She didn't reply, but she nodded slightly, her grip on the suitcase easing just a little. As they drove on, Christian felt something shift within him, a faint echo of recognition in her story. She had experienced a similar life surprise as he had, but she didn't display any self-pity. Instead, she was determined to keep moving forward. For the first time that night, he felt a flicker of something other than anger and despair. It wasn't hope, not yet, but it was enough to keep driving. The clatter of plates and the low hum of conversation filled the small, dimly lit diner Christian had chosen. Grace sat across from him, her fingers wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. She hadn't touched the sandwich he'd ordered for her yet, but her grip on the cup seemed to anchor her, like the warmth steadied her after the long, cold night. "You don't have to do all this," she said quietly, her eyes darting toward the window as if unsure she could meet his gaze. Christian set down his fork and leaned back slightly, studying her. "It's not a big deal. You look like you've been through hell. A meal and some rest won't fix everything, but it's a start." She didn't argue, taking a tentative sip from the cup. He didn't push further, letting the silence stretch between them. For the first time that night, she looked less guarded, though the weight of her exhaustion was still visible. After dinner, Christian drove her to a small apartment on the edge of the city. The space was modest but clean, with warm lighting and sparse furniture. He handed her the key and stepped back. "You can stay here for now. No strings, no expectations, just rest." Grace hesitated, her fingers brushing the key before taking it. "Thank you," she said simply, the words carrying a depth that surprised even her. Christian nodded. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow's a new day." Christian sat in his living room, the morning light filtering through the sheer curtains as his mind turned over the events of the past night. He barely knew Grace, yet her quiet resilience had struck a chord. Perhaps it was the echo of his own circumstances, the betrayal, the upheaval, the need to keep moving forward despite it all. He glanced at his phone, the date glaring back at him. Lauren's birthday. The thought clenched his stomach. She had planned an elaborate dinner party at a luxury venue, a stage to flaunt her charm and social connections. Now, Christian saw it for what it truly was, a facade to conceal her lies. His thumb hovered over her name in his contacts, but he stopped himself. Confronting her outright would give her control, a chance to deflect and manipulate. No, he needed to be smarter, sharper. He needed her to feel the cracks forming beneath her carefully constructed world. His gaze flicked to Grace, still asleep on the couch, her suitcase resting beside her. She looked peaceful, her exhaustion finally giving way to rest. An idea began to form, sharp and deliberate. It was risky, but the thought of throwing Lauren off balance stirred something almost primal in him. A small victory, a shift in power. "Grace," he called softly, stepping closer. She stirred, blinking against the morning light. "I need to ask you a favor." The hours leading up to the party were a blur of movement and transformation. Christian drove Grace to a boutique downtown, where she hesitated at the threshold, her fingers brushing the frayed edges of her coat. "Christian, I can't," she began, her voice uncertain. "You can," he interrupted firmly. "Consider it a loan. And besides, I need you to make an impression tonight." She tilted her head, her brow furrowing. "What exactly is this party?" Christian hesitated before answering. "It's my wife's birthday. Soon-to-be ex-wife," he clarified, his tone edged with bitterness. "Let's just say I need someone who can help me. Make a point." Grace didn't respond immediately, her eyes narrowing as she studied him. "You're serious?" "As serious as I've ever been," he replied. When Grace emerged from the dressing room, Christian barely recognized her. The worn, guarded woman he had picked up the night before had been replaced by someone elegant and self-assured. Her dress, a deep emerald green, hugged her frame modestly, but left no question about her presence. Her hair, swept back, revealed striking features that had been hidden beneath fatigue and grief. She caught him staring and folded her arms, a flicker of unease crossing her face. "This is strange," she admitted, looking down at the shoes she wasn't used to wearing. "I feel like an imposter." "You're not," Christian said, his voice steady. "Trust me, you belong in a room full of pretenders." Grace let out a quiet laugh, the tension easing just a little. "And what am I supposed to do at this party?" "Be yourself," Christian said simply. "That's more than enough." The party was already in full swing when they arrived. Laughter and clinking glasses spilled out from the grand dining hall, the sound grating against Christian's nerves. As they walked in, all heads turned. Grace's entrance was nothing short of stunning, her calm confidence drawing every gaze in the room. Christian kept his expression neutral, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back as he guided her forward. Lauren stood near the center, a vision of perfection in her designer dress, but the smile on her face faltered when she saw them. Her eyes flickered to Grace, narrowing in sharp assessment before darting back to Christian. "Christian," she said, her voice sweet but brittle. "I didn't realize you'd be bringing a guest." "Lauren," Christian greeted her, his tone calm and measured. "This is Grace, a close friend." Grace extended her hand, her polite smile unwavering. "Happy birthday," she said smoothly. Lauren hesitated for a fraction of a second before shaking her hand. "Thank you," she replied, though her tone lacked warmth. Her eyes lingered on Grace's dress, her posture, every detail she could dissect. Harold appeared beside Lauren, his usual confident air now tinged with unease. "Christian," he said, his smile forced. "Nice to see you." Christian's jaw tightened, but he forced himself to smile. "Harold, always a pleasure." The tension between the four of them was palpable. A silent battle waged through glances and unspoken words. Lauren's laugh became sharper, her gestures more exaggerated as she tried to maintain control of the room. Christian played along, his conversation light and measured, but his eyes never strayed far from Lauren and Harold's discomfort. Grace moved through the crowd with quiet grace, her presence a stark contrast to the carefully curated personas around her. She caught snippets of whispers, who was she, where had Christian found her, and ignored them. She had agreed to this out of a mix of curiosity and gratitude, but now she found herself oddly invested in the quiet war unfolding between Christian and Lauren. As the evening wore on, Lauren's mask began to slip. Her smiles didn't quite reach her eyes, and her attempts to corner Christian in private were deftly avoided. Harold, too, seemed restless, his usual charm dulled by the weight of unspoken truths. When Christian finally guided Grace toward the exit, Lauren's voice rang out behind them. "Leaving so soon?" Christian turned, his smile polite but cool. "I think we've stayed long enough. Happy birthday, Lauren." Lauren's smile tightened, her anger barely concealed. As Christian and Grace walked out into the night, the cool air hit them like a release. "Well," Grace said, breaking the silence, "that was intense." Christian let out a dry laugh. "That's one way to put it." "Did it help?" she asked, her voice softer. Christian didn't answer immediately. He looked at her, the exhaustion still etched in her features, but there was something else now, something stronger. "More than you know," he said quietly. The drive back from the party was quiet, the tension from the evening lingering in the air. Christian stole a glance at Grace as they pulled into the driveway of the small apartment he had offered her. She seemed lost in thought, her polished exterior from earlier now giving way to the weariness she'd carried when they first met. "Thanks for tonight," Christian said, breaking the silence as they stepped out of the car. He locked the doors with a soft beep, walking beside her toward the building. "I know it wasn't exactly conventional." Grace chuckled softly, her breath forming a faint mist in the cool night air. "That's one way to put it." She paused at the door. "But you don't need to thank me. I think we both got something out of it." Christian opened the door for her, and they climbed the narrow staircase to the apartment. Inside, the warm lighting softened the sharp edges of the night. Grace dropped her bag by the couch, exhaling deeply. "Look," Christian began, leaning against the kitchen counter. "I owe you an apology. Dragging you into my mess like that, it wasn't fair." Grace shook her head, brushing off his words. "You gave me a warm bed and a reason to wear something other than sneakers and a jacket. I think we're even." Christian smiled faintly, but his expression turned serious. "Still, you handled yourself tonight with more grace than I could have asked for. I saw how they looked at you, how Lauren looked at you, and you didn't let any of it get to you." Grace leaned back on the couch, crossing her arms loosely. "Years of dealing with clients who think they're gods in suits. You learn to smile and nod while they condescend." Christian tilted his head. "Clients? You mentioned you worked in advertising." "Used to," Grace corrected, her tone dipping slightly. "I was good at it too. Campaigns, creative pitches, I lived for it. But then Dad got sick. The late nights, the constant travel. It didn't work anymore. So I left." Her gaze dropped to her hands. "By the time he passed, the industry had moved on without me." Christian nodded slowly, sensing the weight behind her words. "Sounds like you've been through more than your share." Grace shrugged, a small, resigned smile touching her lips. "We all have our battles." Christian pushed off the counter, pacing the small space for a moment. "What if you didn't have to fight alone anymore?" Grace raised an eyebrow, a flicker of suspicion flashing in her eyes. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying Christian began carefully, "that you're clearly talented, and I could use someone like you in my company. We're not just tech, branding, marketing, outreach. They're all part of what we do. You've got the skills, the drive. Let me help you put them to use." Grace sat up straighter, her gaze sharp. "You're serious?" "Absolutely," Christian said, meeting her eyes. "You've spent enough time surviving. Maybe it's time to start rebuilding." Grace studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she let out a soft laugh. "You don't even know if I still have it." "I know enough," Christian countered. "The way you carried yourself tonight, the way you talked about your work. You've got it." Grace hesitated, her fingers tracing the seam of the couch. "What's the catch?" "There isn't one," Christian said plainly. "Think about it. No pressure. Just know the offer's there." The next morning, Grace walked into Christian's office, her suitcase left behind in the apartment. The space was sleek but welcoming, a blend of modern design and functionality. Christian looked up from his desk as she stepped in. "Good timing," he said with a small smile. "Let me show you around." The first day was a whirlwind of introductions, meetings, and a crash course in the company's inner workings. Christian stayed close, watching as Grace navigated the unfamiliar environment with a quiet determination. By mid-afternoon, she was immersed in brainstorming a new campaign, her ideas sparking curiosity and approval from the team. By the end of the day, Christian leaned against the doorframe of her temporary office, arms crossed. "How are you feeling?" "Overwhelmed," Grace admitted, glancing at the notes scattered across her desk. Then, a faint smile appeared. "But, good. It's been a while since I felt this alive." Christian nodded, satisfaction flickering in his eyes. "Welcome back, Grace." And for the first time in a long time, she felt like she belonged. Christian sat in his dimly lit office, the faint glow of his laptop screen casting sharp shadows on his face. A folder lay open on the desk, filled with printouts of bank statements, emails, and snapshots of text messages. He had spent weeks piecing together the puzzle, methodically connecting Lauren and Harold's movements. The threads of their deceit were now woven into a damning tapestry. Surveillance footage flickered on his screen. Harold's smug face filled the frame, standing just a little too close to Lauren during a supposed business meeting. Christian clenched his fists. The two of them were not just tearing apart his marriage, they were trying to destroy everything he had built. "Almost there," Christian muttered to himself, his voice tight with determination. He clicked through another series of emails, each more incriminating than the last. Transfers from company accounts, cryptic language about shifting assets. Lauren's fingerprints were all over it. But it wasn't enough yet. Christian needed absolute proof to confront them on his terms, in a way they couldn't twist or deny. Meanwhile, Lauren had grown more brazen. Over breakfast that morning, she had smiled sweetly, her tone light as she broached the idea of transferring more assets to her name. "It's just simpler, Christian," she had said, her voice oozing false innocence. "We're a team, right? Trust goes both ways." Christian had nodded absently, his expression unreadable. Inside, though, he was seething. Lauren's boldness wasn't just arrogance. It was an insult. She thought she had him wrapped so tightly around her finger that he wouldn't question anything. But he was questioning everything. At the office, Christian found a rare moment of peace, watching Grace thrive in her new role. As she pitched ideas to the team, she sat at her desk amid sketches, drafts, and half-empty coffee cups, her focus razor-sharp. She spoke with confidence, her voice calm but commanding, and the team listened intently. "I like where you're going with this," one team member said. "It's bold, but it feels right for our brand." Grace smiled, the kind of smile that came from genuine accomplishment, not obligation. It's a start. Let's refine it, make it sharper. Christian lingered near the doorway unnoticed. Watching her was like watching something bloom after a harsh winter. Her ideas were fresh, daring even, and they breathed new life into the team. He could see the respect growing for her among his employees, and it brought a quiet satisfaction. Grace caught his eye as the meeting broke up, tilting her head with a faint smile. "Eavesdropping, are we?" "Just observing," Christian said, stepping into the room. "You're doing good work, Grace. Better than good, actually." Her smile widened, though a hint of modesty remained. "Thanks. Feels good to be doing something worthwhile again." Christian nodded, his expression softening. "Keep it up. You're making waves." Later that evening, Christian returned home to find Lauren sipping wine in the living room, scrolling idly through her phone. Her expression shifted when she saw him, morphing into the practiced warmth she reserved for appearances. "You're working late these days," she remarked, her voice light but probing. "It's a busy time," Christian replied casually, loosening his tie. "Lots to handle." Lauren studied him for a moment, then smiled. "Well, don't overwork yourself. You've got me to lean on, remember?" Christian forced a smile and nodded, though his stomach churned. The irony of her words was almost laughable. Upstairs, he opened his laptop again, the screen lighting up with another folder of evidence. He added to it methodically, each filing another nail in the coffin he was building for Lauren and Harold's schemes. Christian leaned back in his chair, his jaw tight. The contrast between Lauren's manipulation and Grace's authenticity gnawed at him. One was a web of lies, calculated and venomous. The other was a spark of genuine determination, a reminder of what honesty and effort could achieve. The end game was approaching, and Christian could feel it. Lauren and Harold had underestimated him. They had grown too bold, too comfortable in their betrayal. But Christian wasn't the fool they thought he was. He glanced at the folder again, the evidence neatly organized and damning. Soon it would all come to light, and when it did, there would be no escape. Christian paced his office, his footsteps echoing in the quiet space. The folder of evidence sat on his desk, a testament to weeks of sleepless nights and relentless focus. Yet, for all the clarity the documents offered, they brought no comfort. Every piece of proof was another reminder of how deeply Lauren and Harold had betrayed him, not just as a husband, but as a partner and a builder of something he had once believed was shared. The knock at his office door startled him. Grace's head peeked through, her expression cautious but curious. "Got a minute?" Christian gestured her in, his shoulders relaxing slightly. Grace stepped inside, holding a few marketing drafts in her hand, but the papers quickly became an afterthought when she noticed the tension etched into his face. "You look like you've been wrestling with demons," she said, setting the drafts on the desk and crossing her arms. "Everything okay?" Christian hesitated. His instinct to keep the mess of his personal life contained battling with a growing trust in Grace. She had proven herself in every way since joining his company, not just with her work, but in the way she carried herself. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I think you deserve to know what's going on." Grace raised an eyebrow, but remained silent, her gaze steady and encouraging. Christian motioned for her to sit, and once she did, he began. The story spilled out slowly, each word deliberate and weighted. He told her about Lauren's affair with Harold, the years of deception that had unraveled in mere days, and the carefully laid plans to siphon money and assets from the company under his nose. He didn't embellish or soften the details. By the time he finished, the room was heavy with unspoken anger and betrayal. Grace didn't interrupt. Her eyes remained fixed on him, and when he finally leaned back, his voice fading, She exhaled deeply. "Christian," she said softly, "I'm sorry. It's unimaginable." He looked away, ashamed to feel vulnerable in front of her. "I don't know why I'm telling you this. Maybe because you've been honest with me, and honesty feels like a rarity these days." Grace shook her head. "You're not alone in this. If it were me, I'd want someone to talk to too." Her sincerity hit him like a salve to a wound he hadn't realized was so raw. "They're planning to force me out," he said, his voice steadier now. "A fake financial crisis, enough to make the board panic and push for a change in leadership. Lauren's been hinting for weeks about simplifying our assets, shifting more of them into her name." Grace's expression darkened. "That's calculated and bold. But you've got them cornered, right? You've been building evidence." Christian nodded. "I do. But I need more. Something undeniable." Grace leaned forward, her gaze sharp. "Then let's make sure you have it, and in the meantime, let's strengthen your position." He frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "You've got the company's trust," she said. "Your employees respect you, and the brand thrives under your leadership. If Lauren and Harold want to make a play for the company, we need to make sure it's rock solid before they can try." Her confidence sparked something in him, a reminder that not everyone in his orbit was playing for their own gain. "How?" he asked. "We go bold," Grace said simply, her tone decisive. "New campaigns, stronger client relationships, and better visibility. We outshine whatever they think they're capable of. If we create a wave now, the board won't even consider a leadership change." Christian studied her, his faint smile breaking through his exhaustion. "You're remarkable. You know that?" She shrugged. "I just know what it's like to lose something you worked hard for. I don't plan on seeing you let them take this from you." Over the next several days, Grace threw herself into her work with even greater intensity. Her strategies were daring, but precise, and the results began to show almost immediately. Clients who had been lukewarm became enthusiastic, drawn in by the bold new campaigns she spearheaded. As a result of the new direction, the team rallied behind her ideas. Christian watched from the sidelines, both impressed and grateful. Her resilience was infectious, a stark contrast to the bitterness he'd been carrying since Lauren's betrayal. In quiet moments, he found himself drawn to the way she moved through challenges with determination and grace. One evening, as they wrapped up yet another late-night brainstorming session, Grace caught him staring. "What?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "Nothing," Christian said, shaking his head. I'm glad you're here. You remind me that there's still good in people." Grace's expression softened. "That's a two-way street, you know. You gave me a chance when I didn't think anyone would. So, if I can return the favor, I'm glad I'm here too." Christian nodded, the corners of his mouth lifting slightly. For the first time in months, he felt like he wasn't fighting alone. Together they were stronger, and that was something Lauren and Harold would never see coming. Lauren had been restless for days. The subtle warmth she observed between Christian and Grace during meetings, the way his eyes lingered on her just a beat too long, and Grace's quiet confidence, it all gnawed at her. She needed leverage, something to shatter the fragile dynamic she sensed forming. And so, she dug. The investigator she hired returned with a file, and Lauren's lips curled into a triumphant smile as she flipped through it. Details of Grace's life spilled out in black and white. Her father's illness, the years of struggle, the time spent homeless. Lauren relished the thought of using this knowledge. If Grace dared to challenge her position, this would be her weapon. The grand conference room buzzed with anticipation. Executives, stakeholders, and key employees had filled the space, their muted conversations a backdrop to the tension Christian felt simmering beneath the surface. He stood at the head of the table, calm and composed, the folder of damning evidence resting neatly before him. Lauren and Harold entered together, their smiles bright but practiced, the confidence in their strides almost theatrical. Lauren's eyes scanned the room, her gaze briefly landing on Christian before moving to Grace, who stood at the far end of the room near the presentation board. Lauren's smile faltered. Her discomfort at seeing Grace in such a professional role was becoming harder to mask, especially as she'd grown suspicious of Grace's growing rapport with Christian. The story has gone halfway. Surely you are also very curious about the ending of this interesting story. Leave a comment popcorn to add energy to listen to the following thrilling details. Ladies and gentlemen, Christian began, his voice steady, drawing the room's attention. Thank you all for making the time to join this meeting. What I'm about to share concerns the integrity of this company and its future. The presentation began smoothly, with Christian outlining key initiatives that had strengthened the company's position over recent months. Grace's campaigns featured prominently, earning nods of approval from the board members. Christian saw Lauren's irritation grow with every mention of Grace's contributions, her fingers gripping her pen tightly. When the tone of the meeting shifted, Lauren and Harold exchanged a quick, wary glance. Christian moved to the heart of the matter, laying out falsified financial reports, questionable transfers, and surveillance footage of private meetings between Lauren and Harold. The room fell into stunned silence. Lauren's face paled, but she quickly leaned forward, her voice laced with forced calm. Christian, what is this? Are you seriously accusing me and Harold of this? Harold's confidence crumbled faster. His attempts to speak were disjointed, his usual charm now a stumbling wreck of denial. This is ridiculous, he stammered. I've done nothing wrong. Christian remained unflinching, clicking through emails and financial records on the large screen behind him. The evidence speaks for itself, he said, his tone icy. And there's more if anyone here needs further proof. Lauren's composure shattered. You're really going to humiliate me like this? She spat, her voice rising. In front of everyone? Over some fabricated nonsense? Grace stiffened at the far end of the room as Lauren's gaze snapped toward her. When the tone of the meeting shifted, Lauren and Harold exchanged a quick, wary glance. Christian moved to the heart of the matter, laying out falsified financial reports, questionable transfers, and surveillance footage of private meetings between Lauren and Harold. The room fell into stunned silence. Lauren's face paled, but she quickly leaned forward, her voice laced with forced calm. Christian, what is this? Are you seriously accusing me and Harold of this? Harold's confidence crumbled faster. His attempts to speak were disjointed, his usual charm now a stumbling wreck of denial. This is ridiculous, he stammered. I've done nothing wrong. Christian remained unflinching, clicking through emails and financial records on the large screen behind him. The evidence speaks for itself, he said, his tone icy, and there's more if anyone here needs further proof. Lauren's composure shattered. You're really going to humiliate me like this? She spat, her voice rising. In front of everyone? Over some fabricated nonsense? Grace stiffened at the far end of the room as Lauren's gaze snapped toward her. And you? Lauren sneered. What does she know about loyalty? Do you people even know who she is? Lauren's voice rose, her words sharp and cutting. She's a charity case, a homeless woman he dragged in off the street. That's your star employee. Gasps rippled through the room. Grace's face flushed, but she held her ground, her expression momentarily stunned before her shoulders straightened. Christian's jaw tightened as he prepared to step in, but Grace raised her hand slightly, signaling him to let her speak. Grace stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "Yes, I was homeless," she began, her gaze moving across the room. "And I'm not ashamed of that. I lost everything when I left my career to care for my dying father. When he passed, I was left with nothing, no home, no job, and no direction." Her words hung in the air, weighted with raw honesty. But what Lauren doesn't understand is that those experiences don't define weakness. They define resilience. "I didn't crumble under the weight of what life threw at me. I rebuilt." She turned to the audience, her voice unwavering. "I've worked hard to earn my place here, and it's that same perseverance that drives me to contribute to this company's success. So, if Lauren wants to use my past to undermine me, let her. But remember this: integrity isn't about where you start. It's about what you do when things fall apart." The room erupted into murmurs of agreement, admiration replacing the initial shock. Christian watched as Grace's composed strength transformed the atmosphere, turning Lauren's intended humiliation into an unintentional spotlight on Grace's courage. Lauren, desperate, turned back to Christian, her voice shrill. "You're really going to choose her over me? Over us?" Christian met her gaze, his expression cold. "You made that choice when you betrayed me, when you betrayed this company." He turned to the board members. "Effective immediately, I am filing for Lauren's removal as a shareholder and terminating Harold's involvement with this company. Legal action will follow." The room murmured its approval, the board members nodding in agreement. Lauren's face twisted in rage, but she had no words left. Harold slumped in his chair, defeated. As the meeting dispersed, Christian caught Grace's eye across the room. She approached him, her expression unreadable. "Thanks for letting me handle that," she said softly. "You handled it better than I ever could," Christian admitted. "You were incredible." Grace shrugged, though her smile betrayed her pride. "Someone once told me to stop surviving and start rebuilding. Guess I took that to heart." Christian smiled faintly. "And I'm glad you did." As they left the conference room, the weight of the confrontation finally lifted. The storm had passed, and for the first time in months, Christian felt the first glimmers of calm. Lauren paced the confines of her once lavish penthouse, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. The meeting had destroyed her carefully curated facade. Harold had vanished, his usual bravado crumbling under the threat of legal action. He had sent her a brief panicked message after the meeting. "I can't risk it. You're on your own." And just like that, the man she had schemed with had abandoned her, leaving her to bear the weight of their downfall alone. Her social circle had turned icy overnight. The phone calls and invitations that once flooded in daily had ceased. Friends who once praised her charm now avoided her, unwilling to be associated with scandal. Every glance she received on the street felt like a silent condemnation. The whispers of betrayal and fraud were louder than any words. Across town, Christian was in his office, finalizing the paperwork for the divorce. He read through each clause carefully, ensuring that Lauren would be left with nothing more than the legally required minimum. The house, the cars, the luxury, they would all return to him. Lauren had gambled with their marriage and his company, and she had lost. When he signed the final document, a weight lifted from his chest. The betrayal still stung, but this was a step toward reclaiming control over his life. Christian leaned back in his chair, staring at the cityscape beyond the window. Lauren's schemes had nearly destroyed everything he had built, but her downfall had made one thing clear. The people who truly mattered were those who stood by him, not those who sought to tear him down. In the weeks following the confrontation, Grace flourished. The team admired her even more after her poised speech in the conference room, and her campaigns continued to yield impressive results. But for Grace, the impact of the ordeal went deeper. Late one evening, she sat at her desk reviewing notes for a new project. The office was quiet, the hum of distant traffic the only sound. Christian appeared in the doorway, his expression lighter than it had been in months. "Still here?" he asked, stepping into the room. Grace looked up, a small smile forming. "You're one to talk." Christian chuckled softly and leaned against the desk. "I wanted to thank you again. For everything." "You don't need to thank me, Christian," Grace said, her tone sincere. "I should be thanking you. You gave me a chance when I didn't think I had anything left to give." Christian shook his head. "You had it all along. You just needed someone to remind you." Grace studied him for a moment. "What about you? What's next?" Christian's expression grew thoughtful. "I'm starting to feel like I can move forward. For the first time in a long time, I'm not looking back with anger. And a lot of that is because of you." Grace's cheeks flushed faintly, but she held his gaze. "You rebuilt your life, Christian, just like I did. It's not easy, but it's worth it." Christian nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "It is." Lauren, meanwhile, found herself staring at the remnants of her former life. Without Harold, or the protection of her social network, her world had shrunk to the walls of her empty penthouse. The headlines were relentless, detailing her fall from grace. She had become a cautionary tale, her name synonymous with betrayal and greed. Every attempt to reach Christian was met with silence. The divorce proceedings were swift and final, leaving her with only a fraction of the wealth she once enjoyed. Her attempts to regain control over her narrative fell flat. No one cared to listen anymore. Grace, reflecting on the past few weeks, realized something had shifted within her. Lauren's attempt to discredit her had brought her past into sharp focus, but instead of shame, Grace felt pride. She had faced adversity and emerged stronger, her resilience turning the tide of a confrontation meant to break her. As she walked through the office the next day, the bustling energy around her felt like a testament to everything she had regained. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was thriving, and for the first time in years, she felt entirely at peace with where she was headed. Grace paused by Christian's office, catching his eye through the glass wall. He gave her a small nod, a gesture of quiet understanding. Together, they had faced the storm, and now they stood on steadier ground. The fallout from Lauren's betrayal had been devastating, but it had also cleared the way for a future built on trust, resilience, and the unshakable determination to rebuild. The courtroom was filled with hushed tension as Lauren and Harold sat side by side, their faces pale and drawn. The verdict was swift and unforgiving. Evidence of their financial crimes, fraud, and conspiracy had been irrefutable. As the judge announced their sentences, years of imprisonment for both. Lauren's composure cracked, tears streaming down her face. Harold slumped in his seat, no trace of his once arrogant confidence remaining. Christian watched from the gallery, his expression stoic. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about justice. For himself, for his company, and for the life Lauren and Harold had tried to destroy. He rose quietly as the court adjourned, the murmurs of onlookers fading behind him. It was over. The days that followed Lauren and Harold's exit were a quiet storm of rebuilding. Christian poured himself into the company, intent on erasing the chaos they had left behind. The board, now fully aligned with him, supported his efforts to reposition the company as a leader in innovation. And at the heart of it all was Grace. Their partnership had grown beyond professional respect. She had become his sounding board, his strategist, and, unspoken but undeniable, a steady presence that reminded him of what resilience could achieve. Christian found himself looking forward to their late-night brainstorming sessions, where ideas flowed freely and laughter punctuated the weight of their work. One such evening, Christian stood in his office, staring at a whiteboard filled with projections and campaign goals. Grace walked in, a mug of coffee in hand, her smile warm but teasing. "You know, staring at it won't make it magically solve itself," she said, setting the mug on the desk. Christian smirked, crossing his arms. "It's not the numbers, it's the people behind them. We've got the talent, but I want more than just results. I want them to feel invested." Grace nodded, leaning against the desk. "Then we start with trust. If the team believes in you as much as they believe in the vision, everything else will follow." Christian tilted his head, studying her. "You make it sound so simple." "It's not," Grace admitted with a laugh. "But you've already done the hardest part, showing them you're still standing after everything. That's leadership, Christian." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, he saw her not as an employee, but as someone who had become integral to his life. "You have a way of cutting through the noise," he said, his tone softer. "Comes with the territory," she replied, brushing it off lightly, though her eyes lingered on his. By the end of the quarter, the company was thriving. Grace's innovative campaigns had drawn in new clients, and employee morale was higher than it had been in years. Christian took a moment during a team meeting to recognize her contributions. "Grace has brought a fresh perspective to this company," he said, addressing the room. "Her work has not only elevated our brand, but reminded us all of what determination can accomplish. Let's give her the credit she deserves." The applause that followed was genuine, and Grace's cheeks flushed as she ducked her head slightly, though her smile radiated pride. Christian caught her eye, and they exchanged a quiet nod of acknowledgement. The following weekend, Christian invited Grace to dinner, not as a boss and employee, but as two people who had weathered the storm together. They chose a small, quiet restaurant overlooking the city, the kind of place that encouraged conversation rather than distraction. As the evening unfolded, Christian found himself reflecting aloud. "You know, when this all started, I couldn't see a way out. The betrayal, the chaos, it felt insurmountable." Grace leaned forward slightly, her gaze steady. "And now?" "Now," Christian said, pausing to gather his thoughts. "I see how far I've come. Not just with the company, but personally, and a lot of that is because of you." Grace's expression softened. "Christian, you've rebuilt this on your own strength. I was just lucky to be part of it." "No," Christian insisted, his voice firm but kind. "You didn't just help rebuild the company, you helped me rebuild myself. For that, I'll always be grateful." Grace looked down briefly, her fingers brushing the edge of her glass. When she looked up again, there was a vulnerability in her eyes. "You gave me the same chance, Christian. When I thought my life had stalled, you reminded me I could still move forward. That means more than you know." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the city lights twinkling in the distance. The connection between them was undeniable, though neither spoke it aloud. For now, it was enough to know they had found strength in each other. Months later, as Christian walked through the bustling office, he felt a sense of pride and calm he hadn't known in years. The betrayal that had nearly undone him was now just a chapter in his story, a painful one, but one that had led to something stronger. He paused by Grace's office, watching as she presented a pitch to a group of employees, her energy and passion filling the room. She caught his eye through the glass and smiled, a small gesture that spoke volumes. Christian smiled back. Together, they had not only rebuilt the company, but had forged something far more meaningful, a partnership rooted in trust, resilience, and the unspoken promise of brighter days ahead. And as he turned to face the next challenge, Christian felt ready. For the first time, he wasn't just surviving, he was thriving. The next day in the cemetery was quiet, a gentle breeze rustling the leaves of the nearby oak trees. Christian and Grace walked side by side, their steps slow and deliberate as they approached the headstone. The carved letters bore the name of Grace's father, and beneath it, a simple epitaph, a life of sacrifice and love. Grace knelt down, her fingers brushing lightly against the cold stone. She stayed silent for a long moment, the weight of memories filling the space between them. Christian stood nearby, giving her the space she needed, his hands resting loosely in his pockets. "I haven't been here in a while," Grace admitted softly, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. "After everything fell apart, I couldn't bring myself to come back. It felt like I failed him, like I wasn't strong enough to keep going." Christian crouched beside her, his gaze focused on her profile. "You didn't fail him, Grace. If anything, you've honored him more than you know. The sacrifices he made, the love he gave, you've carried that forward." She turned to him, her eyes glittering. "Do you really think he'd be proud of me?" Christian's voice was firm, unwavering. "I know he would be. He raised someone who doesn't give up, who rebuilds even when life tries to break them." Grace smiled faintly, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Thank you, Christian, for being here, for everything." Christian reached out, covering her hand with his. "You've shown me what resilience looks like, Grace, and I'll be here, no matter what." They stayed there for a while, the silence between them no longer heavy, but peaceful. As they left hand in hand, Grace felt lighter, as though the past had finally found its place, a foundation for the future she and Christian were beginning to build together. The soft hum of conversation filled the company's newest event hall. Employees, partners, and stakeholders mingled beneath modern chandeliers, the space a testament to the company's rebirth. At the center of it all was Christian, flanked by Grace, as they unveiled their latest project, a groundbreaking initiative blending innovation and sustainability. Christian stood at the podium, his presence commanding, but warm. "This project isn't just about progress," he said, his voice resonating through the room. "It's about renewal, turning challenges into opportunities and building a future we can all be proud of. And none of it would have been possible without the people who stood by me during the hardest times." His eyes drifted to Grace, standing just a few feet away. She gave him a small, encouraging nod, her quiet strength a constant in his life. The applause that followed was thunderous, and as Christian stepped away from the podium, Grace met him with a smile. "You were perfect," she said softly, her voice nearly drowned out by the crowd. "So were you," Christian replied, his tone sincere. "None of this would have happened without you." Later that evening, as the event wound down, Christian and Grace found themselves alone on the balcony overlooking the city. The lights twinkled like 1,000 small promises, and the air was crisp with the beginnings of spring. Christian leaned against the railing, his hands gripping the cool metal as he gathered his thoughts. "You know," he began, "I've spent months thinking about what it means to rebuild. Not just a company, but a life." Grace joined him at the railing, her expression curious. "And what have you figured out?" "That it takes more than strategy or hard work," Christian said, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "It takes the right people. People who see the cracks, but help you fill them. People who remind you that even when things seem broken, they're not beyond repair." Grace tilted her head, her smile softening. "You've been that for a lot of people, Christian, myself included." He turned to her then, his expression unguarded. "And you've been that for me, more than you know." Grace blinked, caught off guard by the intensity in his voice. Before she could respond, Christian reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Her breath hitched as he opened it, revealing a delicate ring that glimmered in the city lights. "Grace," he began, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "You came into my life when everything was falling apart. You reminded me what it means to trust, to fight, and to hope. You're not just a part of this company's success. You're a part of my life, and I don't want to imagine it without you." Tears brimmed in Grace's eyes, but she smiled, her voice steady as she said, "Christian, I don't know what to say." "Say you'll stay," Christian replied. "Say we'll keep building this. Together." Grace nodded, her smile widening as a tear slipped down her cheek. "Yes. Of course, yes." Christian slipped the ring onto her finger, his own hands trembling slightly. For a moment, they stood there, the city stretching out before them, their future just as vast and filled with possibilities. The months that followed were a whirlwind of growth and transformation. The company continued to thrive under their leadership, and Christian and Grace's partnership deepened, blending professional collaboration with personal connection. On a quiet evening in their shared home, Christian watched as Grace sketched out ideas for their next campaign. The fireplace crackled softly in the background, casting a warm glow over the room. "You know," he said, breaking the comfortable silence, "I used to think rebuilding meant starting over, but now I think it means building on what's left, making something even stronger." Grace looked up, her eyes meeting his. "And what we've built, it's more than I ever imagined." Christian smiled, reaching for her hand. "It's just the beginning." The promise of a better, shared future made the weight of the past feel distant as they sat together. Together, they had turned their scars into something beautiful, a testament to the resilience of trust, love, and hope. And as they looked toward the horizon, they knew that the best was yet to come. If this film touches your heart, leave your mark with a like, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel to explore more meaningful stories with us. Share your feelings with us and tell us your own stories. Every word you share is a building block that helps create our strong and enduring community. Together, we'll create a warm space where everyone can share and connect. Finally, don't miss the incredible stories coming your way soon. We're always here to bring you the best selections, full of deep values, yet entertaining. See you there.